Matt Hougan, who is joining us today, is a remarkable man, possibly the second most interesting man in the world. From humble beginnings as a shoe seller and philosophy major to the chief investment officer of Bitwise Investment Management. As you may already know, Bitwise, they're the asset management firm that beat BlackRock and Fidelity on day one of the Bitcoin ETF inflows, with over $238 million coming into the fund, and they have over $1 billion of assets under management. Matt and the Bitwise team, they've started a race to zero on the spot Bitcoin ETF fees, produced some absolutely remarkable ads, and they have me wondering what effects this will have over sovereign freedom technology by Wall Street. Before all that, first off, congratulations to you and the team for last week, Matt.
Thanks so much. Yeah, honored to be here.
You did so well. Possibly the biggest question is, why is the price not pumped with all this capital inflow into these ETFs?
Not pumped yet. Not pumped yet. That's the important word. You know, I think there was so much buildup to a spot Bitcoin ETF that people were jockeying ahead of it. It got priced in the run-up that we saw at the start of this year. My guess is people overestimated the short-term impact, but I equally think they underestimate the long-term impact. I think this will be transformational for Bitcoin. I do think Bitcoin prices will hit a new all-time high this year, and I think 2025 will be pretty spectacular. So patience would be my word.
Yeah. The time horizon, I guess it's the time preference most Bitcoiners are used to. Do you see the all-time high before the halving, or is the halving going to be the catalyst, or how do you approach the halving with Bitcoin as well?
Yeah, it's so amazing that we're getting these two things in the same year so close to one another. You know, Bitcoin's price, of course, set by supply and demand. We know the new supply is going to fall in half. That's going to suck $7 billion a year of new supply out of the market. Bitcoin ETFs, many people think, will pull in $10 billion in net new demand this year. That's a demand shock and a supply shock. If I were guessing, I don't know where the price is going to go. Our expectation for that new all-time high, and we think it'll top 80,000 this year is our price forecast. I bet that will be in Q3 or Q4. You have to see the impact of these events build day after day, month after month. And eventually we will get there, but I do think it's coming.
Yep. Aside from, I've got a couple of questions, but I want to go on a tangent. Aside from the halving coming and the ETFs now being launched, do you guys have any predictions around what the Fed's going to do, reducing interest rates, if they're going to start printing money with the presidential election coming up this year?
Yeah, that's the third leg of the stool, right? You have the halving, the ETF, and potentially lower rates. I think the markets are forecasting more than 1% in rate cuts this year. That's a huge positive for Bitcoin. I suspect the market is a little ahead of its skis. I'm not sure we'll see those rate cuts in March. People are pushing them out to May, but it's going to happen, right? Historically, around US elections, you often see some degree of easing of monetary policy. We've seen inflation come way in, lower rates, less new supply, a new source of major demand. That's a pretty good setup. There are no guarantees in investing, but that's a pretty good setup, and that's what we got right here.
It should be a pretty exciting year. So one of the questions from the community, Bitwise users have pledged to donate 10% of the profits from the Bitcoin ETFs, so Bitcoin open source development, which is absolutely awesome. But I guess what the community would love to know, are there any strings attached to this?
It's a great question. No strings. This is a 10-year pledge, at least 10 years. We may renew it after that. The money goes to 3 groups. It goes to Brink, it goes to OpenSats, and it goes to the Bitcoin development arm of the Human Rights Foundation. Those each work in different areas of Bitcoin development. But we think it's important for ETFs to contribute to this ecosystem that we're built on. And this donation, which is the highest donation percentage amongst all Bitcoin ETFs, is something we're really proud of. It's something we worked on. We thought about those organizations that are getting it. If you're building in this market, you're building in it because you believe in Bitcoin and you believe in self-sovereignty of money and you believe what it can do for the world. It's important to contribute, and we're happy to do that.
Yeah. You clearly do believe in Bitcoin. You've written a 54-page document, which was absolutely incredible. We'll dive into this shortly. It's a must-read for everyone below to be able to understand. It's titled Crypto Assets, the Guide to Bitcoin Blockchain Cryptocurrencies for Investment Professionals. But before we do that, Matt, how on earth did you go from a shoe seller and a philosophy major to the co-founder of Advisor Circle and then the previous CEO of ETF.com? I believe everyone listening would be interested to know your story. Also, when you first got into Bitcoin and if you hold or if you've held any in self-custody, and what your life journey's been like to get you to where you are as the CIO of Bitwise.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. Yeah, I graduated college as a philosophy major. My first jobs were I was a sea kayak guide. I was a minor league baseball mascot, a 9-foot seal, and I did sell shoes on the midnight shift at LL Bean in Maine. I ended up getting a job in the finance industry by reading about a company I admired in the back page of Barron's and writing them a letter. And that set me off on a journey that eventually led me to be the CEO of ETF.com. And I grew that ETF media and data business for 15 years. And during that period, I saw ETFs go from something that no one knew what they were, something that people were afraid of, something where, believe it or not, the Financial Times called ETFs weapons of mass destruction. The US Congress held hearings about whether ETFs would destroy the American dream and American entrepreneurialism. People hated them because they were this disruptive sort of technology legal breakthrough that made investing lower cost and disrupted the status quo. So after I sold that business, I looked around the world and said, what is another technology that's fundamentally disruptive to finance, that makes the world a better place, but which the market doesn't understand, which people don't understand, which politicians don't understand, which means that there's alpha there, that this industry is going to grow and people haven't gotten it yet. And that was Bitcoin, that was crypto. And so after selling the business, I moved over to Bitwise. And I've been in this market for 6 years, and I intend to build for at least the next 20 plus. This is what I'm doing now.
Awesome. And Bitwise, the Bitcoin ETF is not the first quote unquote crypto product that you guys have provided there, have you?
No, that's right. We've been building crypto funds for 7 years. We started with the first crypto index fund, holds the top 10 assets. The majority of that fund is in Bitcoin. We've had private Bitcoin funds, private Ethereum funds, and other products. We help professional investors gain exposure to the opportunities in crypto. So we're sort of straddling the line between crypto and TradFi. Half of us come from sort of both sides of that fence, but we really care about Bitcoin and crypto. You mentioned that we were the first in flows ahead of BlackRock and Fidelity, phenomenal firms, but we're really excited. We want the market, the US market, to have an asset manager that cares about Bitcoin and cares about crypto. And we hope to be that. And we've been doing that for 7 years.
Yep. I'd much prefer to see someone that understands Bitcoin technology like Bitwise win over BlackRock. That's a personal opinion. We'll keep my thoughts off this live stream. Everyone watching, shout out, knows my thoughts in regards to it. Matt, I see the revolution of holding Bitcoin as being an uncensored sovereign bearer share that acts as a store of value long-term against the fiat debasement we see in the world, and also a medium of exchange that can sense anywhere around the world without the trust or permission of governments, institutions, third parties. The ETF is definitely not this. So what would you guys see yourself personally or the Bitwise team, the ETF's place in the world, and can they live side by side? And is it a net positive or a net negative for sovereign Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I recognize, of course, the irony of taking this tool of self-sovereignty and packaging it in a financial product to help people access it. But if you zoom out and think about Bitcoin big picture, and you think about where it's going, trying to create an apolitical settlement rail, trying to create a new self-sovereign currency, Bitcoin needs to be substantially bigger than it is today in order to achieve that goal. And an ETF helps us get there. It brings more people into the market. It introduces people into the market. I'll actually tell you a story from my old ETF days, because there was a somewhat similar example with gold, which is the first gold ETFs launched actually in Australia in 2003 and then the US in 2004. And at the time, people said, this is interfering with gold. We want to hold gold bars and coins directly and self-sovereign ownership of gold. But a funny thing happened after the ETF launch, which is that the volume of gold bar and coin sales rose 5x. So the ETF didn't compete with the ability to own gold directly. It brought more people into the gold market and grew that market. Our expectation is that a Bitcoin ETF doesn't compete with people who want to hold their own keys, hold their own Bitcoin. We think it will bring people into the Bitcoin ecosystem and grow that ecosystem substantially, many multiples the size of the ETF itself. So from my view, Bitcoin ETFs, particularly if they're contributing back, can help Bitcoin get to where it's going. Is it a transitional technology or something? Of course. Is there this irony about packaging this product? Yes. But a world where they're popular Bitcoin ETFs is a world where Bitcoin has a bigger force in the world, and it doesn't compete with the core offering of what Bitcoin does. You can still hold your own Bitcoin directly, even while an ETF exists. And I don't think there'll be negative consequences from that.
Yeah. And what about, I guess, what Senator Elizabeth Warren is trying to do with banning Bitcoin basically as much as she can? And it looks like Jamie Dimon and Elizabeth Warren are joining forces together. Do you see them getting noisier because it looks like they are, or are they going to quiet down now that the SEC has approved this and given it the green light after all these years? And how's that play out short and long term?
I think it's the death cries of a failing ideology is what I take it as. I've often noticed when society makes significant changes, the last minute reactionary cry against it from its opponents is very loud and very shrill. And that's what you're seeing from Elizabeth Warren. You see her raising an anti-crypto army, which is an absurd thing for a sitting senator to say about an asset that, if the fiat system was run well, wouldn't actually pose a threat. I see that as a dying cry. I think that will vanish over time. Look, Bitcoin is going mainstream. It's being adopted by more people. More people are familiar with it. That sort of extreme anti-Bitcoin rhetoric, I think, is a dying breed and will fade in the coming years.
I definitely hope so. One of the things you sort of said there is they see Bitcoin as a threat to the fiat system. Do you also see Bitcoin as a threat to the fiat system? And is there a world where we become hyper-Bitcoinized?
There could be. I mean, my personal view is that you can think of Bitcoin as an alternative rail that the world can fail over to if the fiat system is abused, if it's stretched, if it's limited, if it's punished, if it's debased. There's nothing like inherently from a design perspective wrong with fiat-based currencies. It's just 100 times out of 100, they always fail in the end because people can't resist that level of debasement. So what I see Bitcoin is a way to keep the fiat system honest, and then a place to fail over to when and if, depending on your level of cynicism, that aggressive debasement gets too big. And that's why I said it has nothing to fear if they run the system well. The fiat system can continue to exist, but you have this other alternative there, which you can count on, which doesn't have that level of debasement, which has a fixed supply that you know and trust, and it can keep the rest of the world honest.
Yeah. In regards to Bitcoin keeping the world honest, we can see everything on chain. Who owns what? Are you going to publish what addresses you're holding your Bitcoin in?
Yeah, I have an unsatisfactory answer to that, which is I hope so, but I don't know if we'll be able to. And the reason for that has to do with discussions with our custodian and other factors. So I think that would be good for the world. I hope we can get there, but no promises. Our hands can be tied in certain ways. That's the system that we live in.
Yeah. Okay. I've got a little bit of a video here, and this one, I want a little bit of audience engagement. Shout out to everyone that is watching live. Let us know who you think is more interesting.
You know what's interesting these days? Bitcoin.
Cut. What if we get him?
You know what's interesting these days? Bitcoin. Look for Bitwise, my friends.
As well as creating a fee war, you started an ad war. Absolutely fantastic. If everyone watching live or watching the replay, let us know who was most interesting. First question off is, where do we get cufflinks like that? They're incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, we're pretty proud about those. Bitwise should, we're looking into whether we can offer those as swag. Those are pretty cool, pretty good.
Yeah, please let us know, and if you ever do, I'll let everyone know. I would very much like those. What was the thought behind that? It's definitely Bitcoin centric, definitely talking to the Bitcoin community, but also the older generation as well that may not understand it.
We were sitting around and we knew this was going to be an incredibly competitive environment, right? Little Bitwise going into a marketing war against BlackRock, Fidelity, the largest names in finance. And so we had a team effort across all of Bitwise to come up with ways we could level up our brand recognition. And we had the idea, what if we got the Dos Equis guy? One of the things he says in Dos Equis ads, I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I drink Dos Equis. And we thought it'd be cool if he could say something like, I don't always buy Bitcoin ETFs, but when I do, I buy Bitwises. There's some limitations on that, but we thought it really would connect with people. And the response has been overwhelming. I mean, millions and millions of views. People seem to love it. And it was really fun to film, really fun to get to know that guy. He's a great guy to talk to, as you can imagine.
I bet it would have been an amazing day. You've actually had some pretty amazing days. I'll bring up another video. The last week for you and the team's just been amazing. I dare say 5 years, by the sounds of it, has gone into pulling that day off. I'll just play this. I thought this was pretty cool as well. But you got to ring the bell. What was that like at the New York Stock Exchange?
How about that? Yeah, that's a great video. Ringing the bell for Bitcoin at the New York Stock Exchange. I don't know if you caught the after scenes on Twitter. We even had a handwritten "Buy Bitcoin" sign that we tucked in there. So, this has been multiple years in the making for Bitwise and more than a decade in the making for the Bitcoin industry. But as a sign of how Bitcoin is advanced from a novel idea by a few people maintained on a few computers to a globally relevant asset, I think ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange was a pretty good moment for that. So it was really special.
Yeah. I think there's two camps, and I'm definitely going to hold my Bitcoin in self-sovereign, self-custody and cold storage, on a bit of steel, whatever it is. But I think, like what you were saying earlier, like it's to bring the exposure of everyone into Bitcoin. I truly hope you guys get the signal out there, talk about Bitcoin, and then they come over and then they hold in self-custody. What's the threat of paper shares of Bitcoin being traded and diluting the supply or the price action and stuff? Do you need a report? Like, what's the regulation about your reporting requirements if you're not going to show your address to the public? How can we trust that yourself, and especially the larger institutions, the likes of BlackRock and Fidelity, are not playing around too much with Bitcoin?
Yeah, I will say there's some people on Twitter tracking addresses that have seen thousands of Bitcoin deposited to certain addresses or acquired by certain addresses over the last few days. Those are reasonable takes. Our fund is audited by KPMG, and we have no incentive not to do exactly what the fund says. Just for reference about what happens, on day one, as an example, we had $237 million come into the fund. That comes in as cash. And then between 3 and 4 p.m., we go out and acquire Bitcoin. We bought $237 million worth of Bitcoin, 5,000 some odd Bitcoin, and that was deposited directly with our custodian. And then we woke up the next day, we had $17 million in cash come in. We went out between 3 and 4 and bought that Bitcoin. On Monday, it was 52 million, or Tuesday. Monday was a holiday. And you're relying on centralized audit, which is the gold standard for how funds are run in the US.
Okay.
And you're relying on companies like BlackRock and BitWise and Fidelity putting their reputations at stake. But I do hope we get to the point where we can document these things on chain. I think that's native to the industry and would be best. I just don't know when we will get there.
Yeah, no, it'd be super cool to see. What about cash creates first in kind? At the moment, we're cash creates. Do you see it transitioning to in kind? And if so, sort of what timeline thereabouts? You know, this has dragged on for 10 years for the first spot Bitcoin ETF. Is it going to be another 10 years before this happens, or it's never going to happen?
I don't think it'll be another 10 years, but it'll be another 1 or 2. You know, the US SEC has a rule that says broker-dealers, which is official category, can't touch Bitcoin. And that's the challenge with in-kind creates. And in in-kind create, these broker-dealers or authorized participants would acquire the Bitcoin and deliver it to BitWise. We wouldn't have to go out and trade it in cash. They give us cash and then we go buy it. It's actually not that big a difference in terms of the efficiency of the ETF. The in-kind would be slightly more efficient. My traders would have less work to do. They could end their day earlier, but it's not a huge difference. I suspect we'll get there in a year or 2, but I'm not sure about that. It could take much longer.
Yeah, no, fair. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So this is what I brought up earlier. It's a big document. It's the easiest way, I guess, for everyone to be able to access it at Matt_Hougan on X. You can see it there. Matt's Twitter is linked below, and it's your first pinned post as well. That's how I came across it. So a couple of questions. Right towards the start, you wrote, more fundamentally, few people even understand what crypto really is or why it might matter. Is an alternative currency, a technology, a venture capital investment, a specious bubble? Would love a hot take on what this means to you and the Bitwise team.
Yeah, I think it's a monetary revolution. That's how I think of Bitcoin and crypto. It's a way to drag money into the digital age. It's a way to make the world more efficient. It's a way to allow self-sovereignty of wealth. It's absurd in today's day and age that if I want to hold wealth or if I want to send you money, it has to go through a corporation. That's sort of crazy. And so Bitcoin and crypto is a necessary technology that drags us into a modern age. I often describe it from a technological perspective, but it is it's many things at once. But that's one way to think of it.
No, cool. I appreciate that. There's some really good parts in there. Most of my audience will be looking at the Bitcoin only parts of it, but you pretty much relate everything back to Bitcoin the whole time. What I really liked was the Bitcoin versus Ethereum and XRP versus Ethereum. It's well worth the read, ladies and gentlemen. Do a little bit of research. It took me, I read it over 2 days. It's really not that long, but what was the intention behind it? Because it's been listed with the CFA Institute, the Research Foundation. Who's this really for? And like, it wasn't something that you just wrote overnight.
No, that took a long time for David Lewant and I to write. My colleague, who's now at Falcon X. You look, if you go back to 2021, when I believe, or maybe that was even earlier, there wasn't much high quality professional material on Bitcoin. There was great material on Bitcoin at different sites, but there was also terrible material at different sites. And if you weren't crypto native, it was hard to figure out what to trust and what to question. The beautiful thing about the CFA Institute is this august institution that trains people how to be financial analysts. And so it has that reputation. So we had the ability to write a guide to Bitcoin, blockchain, and crypto for them, to have it go through a 40-person editorial board so that professional investors could have a source that they could trust. I'll tell you, they asked me to make it 6 pages long, and I
made it 10 times.
I showed up with 60, and to their credit, they published that. But another fun fact, it was the most downloaded document they've ever created, which tells you the level of interest. So we wanted to provide a trusted source. There are other great sources out there, but we were really happy to contribute that and to help push Bitcoin and crypto into the professional investor arena.
Yeah, no, awesome. I think it's just even retail. I really do think you should read it. And I've got my own opinions about crypto. They definitely differ from yours. I'm not classing Bitcoin as crypto. But for this information to be going out to the hands of people that are going to educate people and bring them into the space, I think that's a really good start. So again, well done. One of the things that it looks like pushed the ETF over the line, number one was BlackRock, I believe, tapping Gary on the shoulder and saying, all right, Gary, we're ready to go. But as the surveillance sharing agreement, would you be able to explain how they work and what the point is behind them?
Yeah, I think there were 3 factors. So you had BlackRock, you had Grayscale suing the SEC and winning, and you did have this push for surveillance sharing agreements. The way a surveillance sharing agreement would work is that Coinbase or another centralized crypto exchange monitors their trades for potentially fraudulent activity. What would that be? It would be like spoofing, like putting out an indication that you were going to trade and then removing it at the last minute. It would be trading on inside information, etc. Exchanges have done this for years on their own. Coinbase does it, Kraken does it. The crypto industry, of course, is very focused on making sure that the trading on these centralized exchanges is real and robust. A surveillance sharing agreement means that if New York Stock Exchange sees funny things happening on Coinbase, it could ask questions of Coinbase, and Coinbase could report back on whether that fraudulent activity took place. These agreements exist between every stock exchange, every futures exchange, and it's just a way to keep the market honest. In the end, they actually weren't in every single application that was approved. But I do think the launch of ETFs have pushed centralized exchanges to be more honest. As an example of this, actually, the first ETF application we filed with the SEC, you may remember 4.5 years ago, was the one where we said that 95% of the reported volume on crypto exchanges was fake, which at the time was true. It was all these exchanges no one had ever heard of making up numbers. Yeah. And that went away and the market became more clean and robust. This surveillance sharing agreement is just part of the maturation of the market. But again, it's not actually in every agreement that went forward.
Yep. And what about the concentrated risk of Coinbase holding all this Bitcoin for nearly every institution? What happens if something goes wrong there?
Yeah, that would be bad is the answer to that. And that would be bad. I mean, they are the largest crypto custodian in the world. They have a multi-year track record, an incredible team. So I think the risk of that is limited. But if something went wrong there, that would be a real blow. Over time, I would expect different issuers to diversify their custody approaches. And I think that's what we've seen in the ETF industry in other areas of the market. But for launch day, it's an easy choice to go with the largest, most established and extremely capable firm like Coinbase. And that was, I think, why many people chose them. It's certainly why we chose them. We work with a variety of custodians across all our products, Coinbase, Anchorage, Fidelity, and others. But for this product, we thought Coinbase was the best choice.
I guess so did everyone else, really. So we'll fingers crossed it all goes well. I guess the message for everyone: not your keys, not your coins. Get them off the exchanges. So, Matt, you've started this race to zero basically with the fees, came in and undercut absolutely everybody and had the lowest fees at 20 basis points, and then You've just been undercut at 19 basis points. Are you just going to drop it? Are you going to hold it here? Do you see all these fees coming down? And what's going on with Grayscale holding it 1.5%?
Yeah,
It doesn't seem to make any sense.
It's a high number. I mean, we're really pleased at 20 basis points. We're 20% cheaper than BlackRock, and we find that to be a nice competitive differentiation.
Yeah.
1 basis point isn't much. Will we match them eventually? I don't know. But we were really happy to launch with the lowest fee. In the end, investing is one of those worlds where the less you pay, the more you get. And so a low fee is a great thing for investors, and I think actually will attract more people to this asset class. Another way of thinking of it is that the interest rate for holding Bitcoin in a fund fell from 2% to 20 basis points overnight. Makes it really attractive. Grayscale, is a friendly competitor of ours. They were in a unique situation of having $26 billion in assets. It's tough to imagine the game theory of where to price things. I think in the first week, we have seen money exiting the Grayscale product into lower cost products. That will continue for a period, is my guess. And, it'll be nice to have multiple winners in this space, to be honest.
Yeah.
You'll have multiple people talking about it. And I think we're going to end up with 4 or 5 liquid, large Bitcoin ETFs, and that's going to be great.
Cool. I definitely props off to you and the team, and hopefully you're in that 4 or 5. Definitely at this stage you are, and again, number one on day one. It's been called by James and Eric the Kentucky Derby, and is a lot of fun. Couple of other things is, like, there's a question here. And if you could explain it, I guess, from your side, is the ETF price really connected to the Bitcoin price? And another question to add on to that is, if people come in the morning and they buy a lot of Bitcoin and the price is really cheap, and then it gets very expensive in the afternoon, number go up. This is number go up technology. And then you're buying it between 3 and 4. How are you hedging that price movement?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, this will get a little bit technical, but maybe it will be helpful. So an ETF is supposed to trade near its net asset value. So if our ETF holds $25 of Bitcoin per share, your expectation is that the ETF will trade at $25. But as mentioned, if a lot of people want to buy our ETF, the ETF will trade at a slight premium to its net asset value. Maybe it trades to $25 and a penny, or $25.02. What happens then is that there are these institutional investors called market makers or authorized participants, and they will sell shares of our ETF at this higher price, at $25 and a penny, because they know at the end of the day they can come to us and create shares at $25 and make that arbitrage profit. Now the question was really smart, because it's how do we hedge the price movement between when they buy and when they create shares? Actually, we don't have to worry about it. It's how does the market maker hedge? Because they've sold those shares, so they're short shares. So how do they hedge the upside? And what they do is, once they sell those shares, they'll either buy Bitcoin directly, or they'll buy Bitcoin futures, or they'll buy another ETF so that they're market neutral. It's only at the end of the day that they unwind those trades and send us the cash, and we go out and buy the physical Bitcoin. It's a lot of complexity, but the market is always at that neutral level. You will see, I can't guarantee it, but historically throughout ETFs, through the 30 plus years that ETFs have existed, they have tracked their net asset value extremely well. And the reason for that is that institutional traders are greedy. And if it trades at any sort of premium, they'll arbitrage that away. And you can usually trust greed on Wall Street to exist. And as long as that is true, the ETF should track its value.
Yeah, well, I guess greed is fundamentally baked into Bitcoin as well, as that's how it was designed, understanding that human nature is greedy and self-interested. And that's why people go out and they run miners and stuff. It's, yes, for the greater good, for the revolution stuff, and that's definitely what I'm here for. But the way that Bitcoin works is people are fundamentally greedy, and if we can incentivize them as much as possible. So hopefully it continues to to work like that, and the market continues to stay honest through their self-interest. It's remarkable, I guess, the whole blockchain and how it was designed. What are some of the things that you believe, like you've donated the 10% to open source development? What are some of the things that you'd like to see in the space as Bitcoin continues to grow up? We're 15 years old and a couple of days today. Where do you see us going, like in the next 5-10 years, for it to have that next leg up? The ETF was definitely a big line in the sand.
Yeah. I mean, first, I'd like to see all the ETF issuers also donate. Let's all do this. Let's contribute back to this ecosystem. We're going to need to see some measure of regulatory progress and an evening out of regulation, particularly in the US. We've seen that progress abroad. We're going to have to see number go up. If you think Bitcoin can be this apolitical currency rail, this alternative self-sovereignable currency, it needs to be bigger than it is today, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be $5 trillion. It needs to be $10 trillion. So I expect to see that. I'm really excited by the developments you're seeing, around the Lightning Network, around what David Marcus is doing to make it more easy to use in payments. I think that's great. We'll need to see the mining ecosystem continue to be robust, but it's all tracking really well. I mean, there is, I don't see any chinks in the armor that make me nervous. It's had to traject this incredible path. And in one sense, you can look at it as extremely unlikely that it would have succeeded at tracking that path. And in another sense, you can think of it as inevitable. And it seems to be on that pathway. But yeah, regulation, a little bit better regulation, a little bit more balanced regulation, a much larger market, more liquidity, and then easier for everyday people to use. I think those will all be valuable to its continued progress.
Yeah. And there's definitely a lot of people. So well done. And I guess you maybe incentivize Van Eck as well to donate 5% of their profits, friendly competition. So if we can see more and more of it, and it comes back down to the core of Bitcoin. Now, a little bit of controversy when the ETF launches the SEC account, it got compromised, and which was, I'd like to know your thoughts, but then also Gary Gensler's quotes after the approval, they really seemed unprecedented for approving an ETF.
Yeah, I mean, the SEC wasn't using two-factor authentication on its Twitter account. Makes me worry about other government agencies and what they're doing. My greatest hope from that is that more government agencies take cybersecurity seriously here in the US. It was also like one of the most crypto moments ever for the industry to have this happen. So from that sense, we didn't think it was going to disrupt the path to approval, and that ended up being right. You're absolutely right. The signing statements by Gensler and Commissioner Crenshaw were without precedent. I've never seen it in 30 years of interacting with the ETF space. And it really struck me. It actually, very few things can shock me and sort of take my breath away. But to have a regulator, which is not a merit-based regulator, right? They're not supposed to opine on whether this is a good investment or that and bad investment. They're supposed to just help American investors understand the risks and opportunities of investments through fair disclosure. That's their mandate. To have them sign these caustic statements full of inaccuracies was just shocking to me. Now, again, I do think it's the death cry of a fading ideology. I don't think it represents the norm of thinking amongst regulators. And I will tell you, we've had dozens of meetings with the SEC. They're incredibly, at the staff level, crypto competent and fair, and they work very hard and they provide great review. I'm not just saying that because they're our regulator. I really mean that. But those signing statements were shocking to me. And it is a sign that there's still a long way to go until we're accepted as part of the firmament and just as a normal asset. It's very strange to me.
Yeah. Well, like, I wonder why. I wonder why he said that. Is he trying to get somewhere, Treasury Secretary or something? I guess we don't need to speculate here. If you're happy to.
Well, I don't know where he's trying to get, but I just wanted to note that, like, what changed for American investors from the day before an ETF launched to the day after? What changed is that the price they paid fell 90%. What changed is they no longer had to use offshore exchanges that they didn't understand and couldn't trust. What changed is they're now working with institutional products that are audited and use institutional custody. Those seem like a win, right? Like, why not just accept that American investors are better off now than they were before these ETFs existed, is at least my view. Maybe I don't see everything that they see, but that's how I see it.
Yeah. I've got my own views, everyone. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and go through the back catalog there. So we're seeing like huge amounts of Bitcoin being bought up. At the moment, it's OTC. Like, how long can that last? And then once that happens, is that when we get the number go up, along with everything else that we covered earlier? And we sort of touched base a little bit on this question, but if you could just dive into that side of things a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the flows will keep coming and they'll be steady. And while they may take a little dip after we get past the initial excitement, I think they'll actually build over time. An important thing to note is many of the large wealth platforms don't turn on ETFs day one. So like the largest brokers in the US, like Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch, take time to review new ETFs. So I think the buying will continue. We actually have a great analogy in crypto to understand the impact, which is the halving. Halvings happen at a particular moment, but their impact is felt in the surrounding year, right? Number go up around the halving doesn't mean the number goes up the day of the halving. It means the market prices it in before it happens, and then it has a lingering effect for many months and quarters. The same thing is true about the ETF. It's like an extra halving and a half, right, in terms of impact. And that impact will be felt. I think it'll be felt this year, but I don't think it'll be felt tomorrow. It takes time for it to build.
Yeah. And what about when and this may be a silly question, but when you're buying OTC, is it remarkably cheaper than the spot price, or?
It's remarkably tight to the spot price is the answer to that. You can get phenomenal execution for very large size, close to the bid-ask midpoint that you're seeing on leading exchanges usually. At least that's been our experience historically. So there's a lot of liquidity out there. There's more than enough liquidity to support these ETFs. Yeah.
And where's it mainly coming from? Is it people that are just ready to sell big whales, and as well as the miners, or where are all these coins going? Because there's not really that many coins left on the exchange.
Yeah,
in the scheme of things.
It's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. It's a great question, and there is a shortage of supply. There's not enough Bitcoin out there. But that's the beauty of how markets work, is the price will find its level to reflect the demand. So I'm not sure who is selling on the other side, but there's been enough sellers, some of which have been redemptions out of GBTC, to meet demand so far, and the price will find its level.
Yep. And I guess medium to longer term, do you see the ETF and the amount of liquidity in the market leveling out the price more so, I guess, to the downside, not having these 76% bear markets, or are we still going to have the same thing and traders are going to be traders?
I think we're still going to have volatility. I don't know if 70% is still in the cards, because we're diversifying the pool of investors who access Bitcoin, and we're introducing new types of traders. But if you think Bitcoin's going to be sleepy in the next year, I think you're wrong. It's still a new asset. It's still early. We're still in the first inning of this game, and the volatility will continue. So maybe attenuated a little bit, but this is still Bitcoin. It's not gold, and the volatility will persist.
Yeah, definitely think we're still going to see those $10,000-$20,000 days. So not financial advice, but hold on tight. Bitcoin is definitely number go up. Technology. A question here in the chat, and if you've got any questions, you've got a couple more minutes to drop them in the chat below. And they've said, what is the best way to sell GBTC for BITB? But if they want to sell anything to be able to get into BITB, what's the process? We don't need a zone in on Grayscale.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. You can access BITB in any traditional brokerage account. Of course, not financial advice and no guarantees, but we would love to have people in our product. We're proud of it.
Yeah. I'll just see what other questions are. Do you see the possibility of Bitcoin becoming the base layer of all fiat systems? We touched on this earlier. I guess more so what time frame, if it was to happen, would we be looking at?
Maybe in the future. I think of it as an apolitical system onto its own. And I can imagine a world where it's the base layer and then individuals inside countries have their own locally denominated currency. But I think that's years in the making, but it's a great question. That's where we see Bitcoin going eventually, and we're making progress.
Yep. And what about the risk of confiscation with all this concentrated Bitcoin in the ETF, like Executive Order 6102, what they did with gold? Could we see something similar play out? And if so, is there any way to hedge against that cold storage?
Great question. Yeah, cold storage is the answer. I mean, it's worth noting on the executive order, the reason that was given was that the U.S. was on a gold system and it needed to do quantitative easing. And so to do quantitative easing, it needed physical gold. Right now, the Fed is really good at doing quantitative easing without any interference. They're world experts at it. So I don't know that they need to seize our Bitcoin, but yeah, cold storage would be the answer. Self-sovereignty is the answer. ETF is not the solution for that.
Cool. And what about now that the USA has the Bitcoin ETF, what's that do for the rest of the world? Because I guess being the number one superpower, a lot of the world is watching and they were waiting for this. What's the trickle down effect?
Yeah, I think it's got to be positive. I think it's got to be positive. I mean, the rest of the world led on this. Switzerland had ETFs. Germany had ETFs. Scandinavian countries had ETFs. Brazil had an ETF. Canada had ETFs. The US is late, but I think others will follow suit. Look, we've entered the ETF era, and people want ETFs. You're seeing that in the demand. So I think we're going to see them in effectively every country around the world before too long. That's my guess.
Yeah. Final question, I guess, is where would you steer people to? At Matt Hougan, I've put your links below as well. Where would you steer people to? But also, what book would you recommend for people to read if you're a reader yourself?
Oh, man. I've been reading Lynn Alden's book, which is phenomenal. So
Broken Money.
That. And then if you're new to Bitcoin, I know that's probably not your core audience. I actually love some of those early Bitcoin narratives, like the Ben Mesrick book, and some of the early books about sort of the culture of Bitcoin in the 2021 to 2024 period. I think it helps to understand where this industry came from if you want to know where it's going. So Lynn Alden's book is what everyone's reading. Great book. But I would go back to some of those early period books, 2021, 2024 era, because I think that really gives you a feel for this community.
Awesome. And one last question from the community here is, how long do you think all the Grayscale selling will last for? Because that's a lot of Bitcoin that they're holding on to with a very high rate.
It's a lot of Bitcoin. I think the thing to look at is the balance between inflows into new products and outflows from certain other products. And Grayscale is one of them, but they're not the only one. There are also high fee products in Europe where we're seeing some rotation into lower fee products in the US. We'll see. But this is a multi-year story. This ETF is not going away. Companies like Bitwise are going to we had 20,000 conversations with financial professionals last year, and we're going to do it again this year.
Say again? How many conversations?
20,000 last year. And talking to people
Wow.
about Bitcoin, talking to people about Bitwise funds, talking to people about crypto. We're going to repeat that, and now you have other issuers doing the same thing. I think it's going to have a significant impact.
Yeah, no, Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure. For everyone, follow Matt Hougan on Twitter, the Bitwise. Are we going to see any more ads? I've got one more ad I can share that you have done as well. Let's just share this tab. Actually, I've got two for everyone. This one and then one more. Okay, let me just pause that. So that was well done. It definitely looks like the ad war is heating up with the competition. We've got a closing one, but do you have any more on the pipeline that are ready to launch? Are you going to be filming more, or what's that next process?
Yeah, we might just have some clever ideas coming. Look, this is a fun part of it. Bitcoin's very serious. What we're all doing here is very serious, but there's no reason you can't have fun as well.
Yeah.
So expect to see some things.
No, absolutely awesome, man. Let's close it out. Hopefully I've got the right one. They're both 15 seconds long.
Thought you would like to know. Satoshi sends his regards. Look for Bitwise, my friends.
Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure. Stay on the line. Everyone watching, thanks so much. Leave a comment, hit subscribe, hit the like button. Have a beautiful day. Do something nice. Be blessed.